Okay, this is a rather long section. So we're going to see what we can do today, and we'll just see if we come to a good stopping point. The technique of light. We come now to the consideration of the next development, service to be rendered through the medium of another technique. This theme is so vast, and there is so much literature to be found in all the world's scriptures, commentaries, and theological dissertations on the subject of light, that the simple truth and a few basic principles are lost to sight in a welter of words. And that's interesting. It's not the first time we've heard something like that from DK. He says that, you know, we've complicated things to an extreme, essentially. In my various books, I have given much on this subject, and in the book, The Light of the Soul, which I wrote in collaboration with AAB, an effort was made to indicate the nature of the light of the soul. The key to this technique is to be found in the words, in that light shall we see light, all caps. A simple paraphrase of these apparently abstract and symbolic words could be given as follows. When the disciple has found that lighted center within himself and can walk in its radiating light, he is then in a position, or in a state of consciousness, if you prefer, wherein he becomes aware of the light within all forms and atoms. The inner world of reality stands visible to him as light substance, a different thing to the reality revealed by the intuition. He can then become an efficient cooperator with the plan because the world of psychic meaning becomes real to him, and he knows what should be done to dispel glamour. It might be stated that this process of bringing light into dark places falls naturally into three stages. One, the stage wherein the beginner and the aspirant endeavor to eradicate glamour out of their own life by the use of the light of the mind. The light of knowledge is a major dispelling agent in earlier phases of the task and effectively eliminates the various glamours which veil the truth from the aspirant. Two is the stage wherein the aspirant and disciple work with the light of the soul. This is the light of wisdom, which is the interpreted result of long experience, and this streams forth, blending with the light of knowledge. Three is the stage wherein the disciple and the initiate work with the light of the intuition. It is through the blending medium of the light of knowledge, personality light, and the light of wisdom, soul light, that the light is seen, known, and appropriated. This light puts out the lesser lights through the pure radiance of its power. You have therefore the light of knowledge, the light of wisdom, and the light of the intuition. And these are three definite stages or aspects of the one light. They correspond to the physical sun, the heart of the sun, and the central spiritual sun. In this last sentence, you have the clue and the key to the relation of man to the logos. These stages and their corresponding techniques are apt to be misunderstood if the student fails to remember that between them lie no real lines of demarcation, but only a constant overlapping, a cyclic development, and a process of fusion, which is most confusing to beginners. Just as the result of innate reaction to environment produces the apparatus needed to contact that environment. That's very telling there as well. Just as the result of innate reaction to environment produces the apparatus needed to contact that environment, so the unfoldment of the powers which these techniques serve produces modes of contact with soul and spiritual environments. Each of these techniques is related to a new environment. Each of them eventually develops power in the initiate or disciple, which can be used in the service of humanity and in higher spheres of divine activity. Each is related to the other techniques, and each releases the disciple into a conscious relationship with a new environment, new states of awareness, and new fields of service. For instance, one, the power of the technique of the presence, which we just went through, when successfully followed, enables the intuition to flow in and to supersede the activity of the rationalizing mind and to dispel illusion. Oh, excuse me. When successfully followed, enables the intuition to flow in and to supersede the activity of the rationalizing mind and to dispel illusion, substituting for that illusion divine ideas formulated into concepts which we call ideals. The masters, it should be remembered, only used the mind for two activities: A, to reach the minds of their disciples and attract aspirants through the medium of an instrument similar to the disciple's mind, and B, to create thought forms on concrete levels which can embody these divine ideas. The directing agent, the angel of the presence, produces the power to create in this manner, and this we call the result of the intuition, idea or truth, its perception, and its reproduction. Yeah, it's very deep there. The technique of light is more closely related to the mind and signifies the method whereby the illumination, which flows from the soul, whose nature is light, can irradiate not only ideals, but life, circumstances, and events, revealing the cause and the meaning of the experience. Okay, we're going to have to read this again. The technique of light is more closely related to the mind and signifies the method whereby the illumination which flows from the soul, whose nature is light, can irradiate not only ideals, but life, circumstances, and events, revealing the cause and the meaning of the experience. When the power of the disciple to illumine is grasped, he has taken the first step towards dispelling glamour. And just as the technique of the presence becomes effective upon the mental plane, so this technique produces powers which can become effective on the astral plane and eventually bring about the dissipation and the disappearance of that plane. The technique of indifference renders ineffective or neutralizes the hold of substance over the life or spirit functioning in the three worlds, for soul is the evidence of life. In connection, therefore, with the second technique, I would like to take some words out of the Bible, substituting the word light for the word faith. I give you this definition: light is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This is perhaps one of the most occult definitions of the light of the world that has yet been given, and its true meaning is intended to be revealed in the next 2 generations. The word faith is a good instance of the method of rendering blind some of the ancient truths so that their significance may not be prematurely revealed. Light and substance are synonymous terms. Soul and light are equally so. And in this equality of idea, light, substance, soul, you have the key to fusion and to the at-one-ment which Christ expressed so fully for us in his life on earth. I give you this definition. Light is the substance of things hoped for. Okay, so you're looking at soul and Christ expressed fully in his life on earth. This is very good. Perhaps one of the most occult definitions of the light of the world that has yet been given, and its true meaning is intended to be revealed in the next 2 generations. Well, this is something that I would definitely spend a little more time contemplating if we weren't reading this. Because this is something here that would just not render blind, but render dumb. And I can't tell you how many times I've been rendered dumb in my readings of these things. When therefore students and aspirants have made progress in soul contact, they have taken one of the first important steps towards the comprehension of light and its uses. They must, however, be careful not to confuse the light which they can bring to bear on life, circumstance, events, and on environment with the intuition. The light with which we are concerned expresses itself in the 3 worlds and reveals form and forms, their reaction and effects, their glamour and attractive appeal, and their power to delude and imprison consciousness. Okay, the light concerned is soul light, illuminating the mind and bringing about revelation of the world of forms in which that life is immersed. And now we're going to get into the intuition. The intuition, and this is important because we're putting these 2 together here. Because we are being careful not to confuse the light, which can be brought to bear on life, circumstance, events, and on the environment with that of the intuition. So we just went through that, and then the intuition is concerned with nothing whatsoever in the 3 worlds of human experience, but only with the perceptions of the spiritual triad and with the world of ideas. So this is key to keep in mind here. This has 0 things to do with human experience or life in the 3 worlds. 3 worlds of human experience. Nothing whatsoever. The intuition is to the world of meaning what the mind is to the 3 worlds of experience. Whoa, that is unbelievable. I mean that in a really amazing way. That is a crazy analogy. Wow. The intuition is to the world of meaning what the mind is to the 3 worlds of experience. That means it's everything to it. Intuition is everything to the world of meaning, essentially. It is, I mean, it's filling it somehow. It produces understanding just as the light of the soul produces knowledge through the medium of that experience. Knowledge is not a purely mental reaction, but is something which is found on all levels and is instinctual in some form in all kingdoms. This is axiomatic. Let's see here. And that just an axiomatic means it's self-evident. That's something that I had to look up. That happens quite a bit in these books. I don't know all of the definitions of all of the words. So axiomatic is self-evident or unquestionable. Maybe I make myself look silly, but that's fine. The five senses bring physical plane knowledge. Psychic sensitivity brings a knowledge of the astral plane. The mind brings intellectual perception, but all three are aspects of the light of knowledge coming from the soul as it informs its vehicles of expression in the vast threefold environment in which it chooses to imprison itself for purposes of development. On a higher turn of the spiral, the intuition is the expression of the threefold spiritual triad. Placing it in relation to the higher levels of divine expression as a result of the life of the monad and energy which carries revelation of divine purpose. And it's inherent, it's innate, it's in that energy. It's built in, it's innate in that. It's inevitable. It's there. It is in the world of this divine revelation that the disciple learns eventually to work, and in which the initiate consciously functions. Of this higher experience, the active life of the three worlds is a distorted expression, but constitutes also the training ground in which capacity to live the initiate life of the intuitional perception and to serve the plan is slowly developed. The initiate life of intuitional perception. These distinctions in time and space, because all distinctions are part of the great illusion, though necessary and inevitable when the mind controls, must be carefully considered. Disciples will reach a point in their development where they will know whether they are reacting to light of the soul or to the intuitional perception of the triad. They will then come to the point where they will realize that intuitive perception, as they call it, is only the reaction of the illumined personality to the identification tendency of the triad. I'm going to read that again. Certainly. They will then come to the point where they will realize that intuitive perception, as they call it, is only the reaction of the illumined personality to the identification tendency of the triad. But these concepts are beyond the grasp of the average man because fusion and identification are by no means the same. Yeah, that's a section worth reading again, certainly at some point. The rules for the technique of light have been adequately laid down in the Raja Yoga system of Patanjali. of which the 5 stages of concentration, meditation, contemplation, illumination, and inspiration are illustrative. These, in their turn, must be paralleled by a following of the 5 rules and the 5 commandments. I would ask you to study these. They, in their turn, produce the many results in psychic sensitivity, of which hierarchical contact, illumination, service, and discipline are descriptive, and finally, the stage of isolated unity, which is the paradoxical term used by Patanjali to describe the inner life of the initiate. They, in their turn, produce the many results in psychic sensitivity, of which hierarchical contact, illumination, service, and discipline are descriptive, and finally, the stage of isolated unity, which is the paradoxical term used by Patanjali to describe the inner life of the initiate. Isolated unity, it's paradoxical. Yeah, I think we can see why it's paradoxical, and because you're becoming more inclusive, and yet there's more there in a sense. You have access. You're accessing more in an isolated unity. It is a paradoxical term. You can only imagine, right? Like these are really illuminating terms, and something to contemplate, but probably not something we can grasp until we can. It's not something we can get until we get it. Right? But it's still telling, and it's good to put this material in. Most of what I have said above is well known to all aspirants, whether they study the Raja Yoga teaching of India or the life of practical mysticism that are laid down by such mystics as Meister Eckhart and the more mentally polarized modern esotericists. These latter went beyond the mystical vision by arriving at fusion. I need not enlarge on this. It is the higher stage of at-one-ment to which all true mystics bear witness. What does concern us here is how this light is recognized, appropriated, and used in order to dispel glamour and render a deeply esoteric service to the world. It might be said that the inner light is like a searchlight, swinging out into the world of glamour and of human struggle from what one master has called the pedestal of the soul and the spiritual tower or beacon. These terms convey the idea of altitude and of distance, which are so characteristic of the mystical approach. Power to use this light as a dissipating agent only comes when these symbols are dropped and their server begins to regard himself as the light and as the irradiating center. Herein lies the reason for some of the technicalities of the occult science. The esotericist knows that in every atom of his body is to be found a point of light. He knows that the nature of the soul is light. For aeons, he walks by means of the light engendered within his vehicle, by the light within the atomic substance of his body, and is therefore guided by the light of matter. Later, he discovers the light of the soul. Later still, he learns to fuse and blend soul light and material light. This is the next at-one-ment. Then he shines forth as a light bearer, the purified light of matter and the light of the soul being blended and focused. The use of this focused light as it dispels individual glamour teaches the disciple the early stages of the technique, which will dispel group glamour and eventually world glamour. And this is the next point with which we will deal. The theme with which we are dealing, the light of the soul as it dissipates glamour in the 3 worlds, is the most practical and useful and needed subject for study to be found today. You can't make it up. Right? And surely this is really true today, because, have we gotten to this point? Has everyone gotten to this point? It's hard to say, man. It is practical and useful and needed subject for study found today. It concerns the astral plane, and the service to be rendered is vital and timely. The ridding of the world of the individual, the ridding of the world of the individual and the world of humanity as a whole of the all-enveloping glamour which holds humanity in thrall is an essential requirement for the race. The new era, which will open up before mankind at the close of the war, will be distinguished by its mental polarization and consequent freedom from glamour. Then illusion will, for a time, control until the intuition is more fully developed. This illusion will produce vastly different results to those which follow when men live and work in the midst of glamour. This illusion will produce vastly different results to those which follow when men live and work in the midst of glamour. The second characteristic of the new era will be the scientific approach to the entire problem of glamour, which will then be recognized for what it is and will be scientifically dissipated by the use of the illumined minds of groups working in unison for just that purpose. And I know that there's groups doing this today. We know that if we study this material. Taken part in plenty of meditations. I'm not saying that it's good or bad. I'm saying I don't quite often right now. I haven't been doing any group working with any groups necessarily. As it would, I don't think, as you would call it, a small group, maybe. But not something that is out and, where we talk about, it's not being done that way. I think, we get our share of work for the day, and that's what we do. We do. That's how I see it right now. I feel like I get my work for the day in the morning, and that I work through it, and by the end of the day, then hopefully things were cleared. That may be that may sound a little weird, but that's how it appears from where I'm sitting. The proposition, therefore, which I'm laying before you, or the aspirants and the disciples of the world, is the possibility of a definite world service. Groups will eventually be formed of those who are working at the dissipation of glamour in their individual lives, and who are doing so not so much in order to achieve their own liberation, but with the special objective of ridding the astral plane of its significant glamours. They will work unitedly in some major phase of world glamour by the power of their individual illumined minds. Unitedly, they will turn the searchlight of the mind, reflecting the light of the sun, but at the same time radiating its own inner light upon the mists and fogs of earth. For in these mists and fogs all men stumble. Within the lighted sphere of the focused radiant light, reality will issue forth triumphant. And this is really what I was just talking about. I think we do this. This is given to us. It is interesting to note that the most ancient prayer in the world refers to the three aspects of glamour. And it is for these that the three techniques must be used to make release and progress possible. As you know, this prayer runs as follows. And it's from the Brihad, which is how I know it. Brihad Aranyaki Upanishads. The Upanishads are beautiful. But honestly, at this point, I don't really read anything but this material. But I have been exposed to all that in the past. And the Brihad is absolutely beautiful. Lead us, O Lord, from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real, from death to immortality. And Master says this quite often. Lead us from darkness to light refers to the mind as it becomes eventually illumined by the light of the intuition. This illumination is brought about by the means of the technique of the presence from whom the light shines. This is the mediating factor producing the transfiguration of the personality and a center of radiant light upon the mental plane. The statement is true whether one is speaking of an individual or of that focal point of light which is formed by the mental unity and the clear thinking of advanced humanity. These, through the power of their unified minds, will succeed in ridding the world of some aspect of the great illusion. Okay, so now we're going down. That was the mental plane. Now we're coming down to the astral. Lead us from the unreal to the real. A specific relation to the astral plane and its all-encompassing glamours. These glamours embody the real or the unreal and present them. These glamours embody the unreal and present them to the prisoners of the astral plane, leading them to mistake them for reality. This imprisonment by glamour can be ended by the activity of the technique of light utilized by those who work in group formation for the dissipation of glamour and for the emergence in the consciousness of men of a clear conception and recognition of the nature of reality. Okay. So we'll kind of see this would have been the technique of presence was in this first portion of this. Now we're on to the technique of light. Down here we can see this pattern. It's really always there. This particular work of dissipation is our immediate theme. It is of vital importance that those who recognize the open door to the future through which all men must pass should begin to carry forward this work. Only thus can humanity be helped to leave behind the errors, the glamours, and the failures of the past. It is this technique which brings freedom from glamour and which can transform human living and so bring in the new civilization and culture. This dissipation can be carried forward by disciples in all parts of the planet, aided by the world aspirants. It will, however, be primarily the work of those whose ray focus makes astral living the line of least resistance and who have learnt or are learning to dominate it by the power of thought and mental light. These are the sixth ray people in the first instance, aided by aspirants and disciples upon the second and fourth rays. It's very interesting, deep stuff there. In time and space, this task will be, first of all, instituted and controlled in group formation only by aspirants whose soul or personality rays are the sixth, or by those whose astral bodies are conditioned by the sixth ray. That's very telling. And we've talked about this a number of times. Finding out your ray structure is very personal. It took quite a while to get some grasp on it. There's many factors that play into it, so it's hard. We just have to keep moving. It's something we need to study, but it's also it's alive, right? It's fluid. When they have grasped the nature of the work to be done and fanatically adopted the technique of light in the service of the race, their work will be completed by second ray disciples working from the ashrams of those masters who take disciples. The work done by these two groups will be finally revealed at a much later date by those aspirants and disciples who will swing into astral activity when the fourth ray again begins to manifest, which is in 2025, which we can probably start seeing very, very soon, if we're not already. Therefore, the work of dissipating glamour is carried forward by those who come out into manifestation along the lines of energy, which embody the second, fourth, and sixth rays. I emphasize this as disciples frequently undertake tasks for which they are not particularly fitted and whose rays do not aid them in accomplishment and sometimes prevent that accomplishment. The whole subject is related to consciousness, to the second aspect, love, wisdom, and concerns the forms through which mankind becomes progressively aware. Glamour is caused by the recognition of that which man has himself created, and as has occultly been said, man only becomes aware of reality when he has destroyed that which he has himself created. These forms fall into two major groups. That is such a deep statement there as well, if we can but grasp that. Man only becomes aware of reality when he has destroyed that which he has himself created. And show me something that you haven't created, sir. I'm just saying, just show. I don't mean that in the literal way. I'm just making a statement there. These forms fall into two major groups. Those forms are of very ancient origin, which are the result of human activity, human thinking, and of human error. They embrace all the forms which the desired nature of man has created down the ages and are the nebulous substance of glamour, nebulous from the physical angle, but dense from the angle of the astral plane. They are that which provides the incentive behind all striving and activity on the outer plane as man attempts to satisfy desire. From these forms, the individual aspirant has ever to rid himself, merging after so doing through that gate which we call the second initiation into a wider consciousness. To those forms which are being constantly created and ceaselessly produced in response to the aspirational nature of humanity, and which provide the enticements which lead the man along towards high personal achievement in the first instance and spiritual achievement later. They have in them the indications of the new and the possible. These likewise, strange as it may seem, constitute a glamour, for they are temporary and illusory and must not be permitted to hide the real. That reality will precipitate itself at the right moment once the higher light pours in. And that word precipitate says a lot nowadays to me. And it's, if we look at what precipitation means and how that process happens, and we're looking at this energetically, because look, we're not in a cloud. We're not seeing how this precipitation is formed anyway. We're not staring at energy all day, so we're not seeing how this is precipitated anyway. But if we can imagine the precipitation in a cloud, we can imagine the precipitation of energies. And that's why I really love that word, and it helps so much throughout this. The reality will precipitate itself in the right moment once the higher light pours in. They are indicative of the real and are often mistaken for the real. They are in conflict with the old thoughts and desires of the past and must eventually give place to the factual presence of the real. They provide, in times of crisis, the great testing for all aspirants and disciples, evoking the subtlest kind of discrimination But once that testing has been triumphantly passed, then the task of dissipating both these types of glamour can be given to the disciple and the aspirant, with the emphasis upon the immediate need for any particular and current world glamour. Doesn't that make I hope that makes sense. It does appear to make sense currently to me right now. I hope that makes sense. This is our work. It seems very clear that this is the process, and these books really explain, our condition as a whole, It will be apparent to you, therefore, that groups working consciously at the service of dissipating glamour will have the following characteristics. They will be composed of sixth-rate aspirants and disciples, aided by second-rate spiritual workers. They will be formed of those who are learning or have learned to dissipate their own glamours and can bring understanding to the task, are focused upon the mental plane and have, therefore, some measure of mental illumination. They are mastering the technique of light. C, are aware of the nature of the glamours which they are attempting to dissipate and can use the illumined mind as a searchlight. 3, they will count among their numbers those who, occultly speaking, have the following powers in process of rapid development. The power not only to recognize glamour for what it is, but to discriminate between the various and many types of glamour. And I want to say that that's pretty, we should be able to see these now, we can discern them. We can look at them individually and see through this much more clearly now. B, the power to appropriate the light, absorbing it into themselves, and then consciously and scientifically project it into the world of glamour. The masters, the higher initiates, and the world disciples do this alone, if need be, and require not the protection of the group or the aid of the light of the group members. You see, we can't look at this outer world and expect to understand what's going on. It must be looked at esoterically. I mean, to even begin to understand. And by esoterically, I mean through the lens of dissipated glamour. No more illusion. We have to really be able, see clearly here. Our greatest frustration is probably our own glamours at this point, and which is our own ignorances, right? So if that's how you feel about it, then I would say we're certainly on the right track, because my own ignorance has always been what infuriates me the most, has infuriated me the most. I mean, and I don't mean now, I mean, ultimately in the past, it's what pushed me along, was I knew things weren't right, and I just can't handle that. I didn't want that that illusion, the delusion, the glamour. Just we want what's real. The power to use the light not only through absorption and projection, but also by a conscious use of the will, carrying energy upon the beam of projected light. To this, they add a persistent and steady focus. This beam, thus projected, has a twofold use. It works expulsively and dynamically. much as a strong wind blows away or dissipates a dense fog, or as the rays of the sun dry up and absorb the mist. It acts also as a beam along which that which is new and a part of the divine intention can enter. The new ideas and the desired ideals can come in on the beam, just as the beam directs and brings in airplanes to a desired landing place. Wow. Well, I think we're going to call it there for today. That was a lot. This is a ton of material to ponder on. This is a new section right here, the dissipation of individual glamour. It's kind of I recognize it in the book. It's recognized in the glossary, or in the table of contents rather, as being a separate section. And that should be a good place to stop. We did about 11 pages in the book. And, I hope we're getting somewhere, and it certainly seems to be kind of coming together. Hopefully these patterns are becoming recognized, and we're seeing, more and more about where all this is going. And we can recognize more of what is real in our life. And I want to say we can also see potentially what others are dealing on in their life. This is key. We can see what others are working through and towards. Okay, friends. We will see you next time tomorrow. All right. Have a good one.